Till borrowing from everyone, my sister announced, the room erupted in cruel laughter. I knelt alone in broken glass, 5 years of funding their lives, one text to end ideal. They had no idea. I was kneeling on the floor, the cold shards of broken glass digging into my knees and the palms of my hands, and all I could hear was the cruel, mocking laughter of my own family. My sister, Clara, was standing over me, clutching a glass of expensive champagne that I had paid for her face twisted into a smug mask of contempt. Still borrowing from everyone, she had announced to the packed, glittering room, a room filled with people whose lives were entirely subsidized by me. The room, full of my cousins, my aunts, and even my own parents, erupted in a cacophony of vicious, superior snickers and giggles. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I, the person who had single-handedly funded their lavish lifestyles for the last 5 years, was being publicly mocked for supposedly being a beggar. I was physically on the floor because I'd just tripped over the discarded box for the new, absurdly expensive designer watch I'd bought for my father, sending a cheap wine glass, one of the few things I actually owned, crashing to the hardwood. And as I knelt there, surrounded by the literal and figurative debris of their lives, I realized they had no idea. They had no idea that the money tap, my money tap, was about to be turned off forever. The laughter felt like a physical assault, the culmination of 5 years of emotional and financial abuse. I'm telling you this story now because I need to know, absolutely need to know, if I was wrong for the calculated, brutal way I chose to end it all. Tell me honestly if you would have done the same thing. My name is Sarah, and to my family I was invisible, except when my bank account was visible. To understand why I ended up kneeling alone in a pool of broken glass, listening to the laughter of the people I loved, you have to go back to 5 years ago, right after my 23rd birthday. I was, by all accounts, the responsible one, while my older sister, Clara, was bouncing between art schools and failed business ventures, racking up debt and demanding attention. I had been quietly plugging away. I finished my computer science degree early, landed a high-paying job in tech right out of college, and thanks to a combination of luck and sheer grinding, I hit the jackpot when my company was acquired. Suddenly, I wasn't just comfortable, I was wealthy. Not billionaire, wealthy, but wealthy enough to live a life free of financial worry, and crucially, wealthy enough to buy a nice house and invest wisely. Clara, on the other hand, was always in crisis. Her latest passion project had tanked, leaving her drowning in credit card debt and facing eviction. She called me, not to apologize for years of being a condescending bully, but to demand help. Our parents, who always saw Clara as the fragile, artistic one who needed protecting, essentially guilt, tripped me into it. "She's your sister, Sarah. You have so much now. Just help her get back on her feet." That phrase, "help her get back on her feet," became the mantra of my next half-decade. It started small, paying Clara's rent for 3 months. Then it escalated to paying off her credit cards. Soon, she realized that I wouldn't say no, and the demands stopped being requests for help and started becoming entitlements. She'd call me, not even bothering to preface it with a lie. Just, "Sarah, send $500 for a new pair of shoes," or "I need a deposit for a new apartment that's closer to the city." I was a walking, talking ATM, but an invisible one. The money would flow, but the credit, the thanks, and the respect never did. If anything, the more I gave, the more scornful Clara became. It was as if my success was a personal insult to her, and the fact that I had to bail her out only deepened her resentment, which she masked by treating me like I was fundamentally beneath her. And my parents, they weren't much better. They had lived a modest, quiet life, always complaining about their finances. Once they realized I could solve their problems, they started making demands too. A new car for my dad because his old one was embarrassing. A massive kitchen renovation for my mom because she deserved it. They sold the house I grew up in and used the profit for an extravagant retirement cruise, moving into a huge, modern condo that I had to secretly pay the maintenance fees for. They never asked me. They just informed me of their new financial obligations and waited for the money to appear. They started hosting these huge, showy parties like the one where the climax took place, inviting all our extended family and friends, all to show off the wealth they now enjoyed, wealth they pretended was their own. I was only invited because they needed me there to feel superior to me, or maybe just to make sure I saw what my money was buying. The worst part was the narrative they created about me. Because I worked constantly and lived relatively modestly, saving and investing for my future, not spending everything on superficial junk, they convinced everyone, including themselves, that I was still struggling. They told the extended family that I borrowed money from time to pay my rent, or that I was still recovering from the financial stress of my startup years. This completely justified their continuous demands in their minds. Poor Sarah is a little unstable, but we, the responsible ones, are helping her by letting her contribute to our stability, was the underlying, unspoken story. I tried to speak up once. I remember it clearly. It was Thanksgiving, about 2 years in. I gently brought up the fact that I was paying for Clara's entire European vacation. My mother immediately cut me off, her voice laced with sharp disapproval. "Sarah, your sister needs this rest. You've always been so tight with your money, you wouldn't understand. Just be grateful you're in a position to help family." I shrunk back, humiliated. The sheer audacity of twisting my generosity into a character flaw was breathtaking. After that, I just stopped arguing. I became the silent, resentful provider. I funneled money into their accounts, paid their bills, covered their expensive whims, and watched them live a life of comfort and social climbing entirely on my dime, while they simultaneously treated me like the awkward, failed relative who should be pitied and ignored. I was a ghost in my own financial life. Every time I tried to reclaim my space, my sister would make a passive-aggressive comment, like suggesting I should trade my sensible sedan for something more appropriate for someone who claims to work in tech. I even overheard my mother once telling an aunt that I was a good girl, but terribly naive with money. She'd be lost without us. The contempt was baked into their DNA. It was this constant, soul-crushing humiliation that led to that final evening. It was my father's 60th birthday party, hosted at the ridiculous, oversized condo I was subsidizing. The room was full of family, old friends, and new social acquaintances they'd acquired thanks to their newfound wealth. Clara had naturally taken over the planning, hiring an expensive caterer and insisting on the finest champagne. I arrived late, exhausted from a 60-hour work week, carrying a beautifully wrapped, incredibly expensive gift, a limited edition vintage watch my father had always dreamed of. I had stretched my budget for this, wanting to finally receive genuine appreciation, even if it was just once. As soon as I walked in, Clara, already tipsy and loud, spotted my sensible work dress. Oh, look who decided to grace us with her presence. She slurred, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Don't worry, everyone. She brought a bottle of that cheap stuff she drinks. Probably the only thing she can afford." I ignored her, walking straight to my father, who was holding court by the champagne table. I presented the watch. He looked at the box, smiled vaguely, and immediately handed it to my mother. "Darling, put this with the other gifts, would you? We can open them later." He didn't even acknowledge the effort. He turned back to his conversation, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Humiliation was a dull ache I was used to, but this felt different. This felt like the final rejection. I retreated to a quiet corner, trying to avoid Clara, who was now holding court near the entrance. I was clutching a glass of inexpensive sparkling wine, my attempt to save money in a world saturated with my stolen wealth. As I tried to slip past her, focusing on the exit, I tripped. I tripped not over air, but over the discarded empty box of $5 bottle of liquor that Clara had simply left on the floor. I went down hard, the cheap wine glass shattered in my hand, scattering sharp fragments across the dark hardwood floor. And that's when Clara saw her opportunity. She leaned in, her voice shrill with glee, and yelled over the music, still borrowing from everyone. The implication being that even the wine glass I broke wasn't truly mine. The room erupted. The laughter was instantaneous and unified. My mother and father looked away, pretending not to notice. I knelt there, the glass biting into my skin, the sound of their mocking joy washing over me. In that split second, the 5 years of silent resentment boiled over, coalescing into a single, crystalline thought. This ends now. I looked at my hands, bleeding slightly from the shards, and then up at Clara's triumphant face, and I knew what I had to do. I didn't get up. I pulled out my phone right there on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and cruel laughter, and I started typing. So that's the situation I was in, kneeling on the floor, bleeding slightly, having just been publicly humiliated by the people whose entire lives I sustained. I had to make a choice: continue to be the silent victim, the mocked provider, the invisible ATM, or detonate the bomb I had been sitting on for 5 years. Before I tell you exactly what I typed, the one text to end ideal, and the explosive, glorious aftermath, I want you to pause right here. Take a moment, comment below right now. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just cleaned yourself up and quietly left? Or would you have unleashed 5 years of rage in the most financially devastating way possible? I need to know if my decision was justified. I ignored the throbbing pain in my hands. I ignored Clara's amused gaze. I went straight to my banking app and then to my family's communication group chat. This wasn't going to be a tearful speech. It was going to be a cold, professional execution. I didn't want the drama of a verbal fight. I wanted the finality of a contract breach. I first transferred all remaining funds from my parents' joint checking account, which I kept topped up for their emergencies, back into a subsidiary savings account only I controlled. I changed the passwords on all the utility and maintenance accounts I paid for. I did the same for Clara's rent and credit card auto payments. This took less than 60 seconds. Then I wrote the text, ensuring it was formal, brief, and utterly devoid of emotion. I wanted them to know this wasn't a tantrum. It was a business decision. I hit send and watched the screen for the confirmation. I stood up slowly, deliberately, ignoring the lingering shards of glass. Clara was still laughing. My father was still pontificating. Nobody had noticed me yet. My phone vibrated almost instantly. It was my mother in the group chat asking, "Sarah, what is this?" Clara snatched her phone out of her pocket, read the screen, and her face went from mockery to pure, unadulterated shock. My father, seeing the sudden shift in mood, pulled out his own phone. I stood silently, the center of the sudden, devastating silence. The text I sent, the one text to end it all, was simple and brutal. Notice of cessation of financial support. Effective 12:01 a.m. tomorrow. All discretionary funding, payments, and financial aid. All recipients are terminated. This is irrevocable. Additionally, expect a detailed invoice for the full, non-repayable sum of the past 5 years of financial assistance from my attorney within 72 hours. Consider this the beginning of the repayment phase. The fallout was instantaneous, epic, and exactly what they deserved. Clara shrieked, not a laugh, but a raw, panicked shriek. "What does that mean, Sarah? Are you joking? My rent is due Monday." My father's face was white. He stumbled back, spilling his champagne. "Repayment, Sarah, we're family. You gave us that money." My mother, the calmest of the three, looked at me with cold fury. "You can't do this. We relied on you, you promised." I finally spoke, my voice steady, amplified by the silent, watching crowd of party guests who were now witnessing a real-life soap opera. I promised to help you get back on your feet 5 years ago. I did not promise to be your permanent retirement fund or your reckless spending safety net. As for repayment, I continued gesturing around the lavish room. 5 years of my earnings bought this party, this condo, your cars, your vacations, and your entire illusion of wealth. You told everyone I was still borrowing from people. Well, now you'll find out what real borrowing is. You will repay every cent. I suggest you start selling the car, the jewelry, and maybe that expensive watch you haven't even opened yet, Dad. Clara lunged at me, tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow, but of pure terror at the loss of her safety net. You absolute witch, you'll ruin us. I stepped back, my eyes cold. You ruined me first. You ruined my peace of mind, my trust, and my future. I just hit the reset button. I didn't wait for the inevitable screaming match. I turned, walked straight out the door, leaving my stunned, horrified family to face the social wreckage and the financial ruin that was coming within the next 48 hours. The attorney I had already hired was one of the best. The next day, I filed an itemized account of every transfer, every bill payment, every credit card payoff, all meticulously documented as loans. They received the invoice for the total sum, a staggering $450,000. The consequences were swift and brutal. My parents couldn't afford the condo. They had to sell it immediately, and the frantic liquidation didn't even cover a quarter of the debt. Clara's world completely collapsed. Her credit cards were canceled, her car was repossessed after the first missed payment, and she was, ironically, forced to borrow money, real money with real interest, from actual creditors, not her private, complacent ATM. The extended family, seeing the public collapse and the truth, revealed that my parents and sister were broke, and I was the true, wealthy provider, quickly distanced themselves. The laughter stopped, the mocking disappeared. They were left with nothing but the bill, the debt, and the profound, humiliating realization that the woman they mocked was the one who had truly held all the power all along. I moved on. I bought a quiet home far away, focused on my career, and invested the repaid money, now knowing that my future was truly secure. It was a brutal move, yes. It destroyed my relationship with my family forever. But as I look back, sitting in the quiet peace of my own home, free from the demands and the contempt, I know one thing for sure. I should have sent that text 5 years ago. The moral of this story is simple. Never let your compassion become a weapon against yourself. Generosity should not be mistaken for an obligation, and when people mistake your kindness for weakness, the only solution is to show them the full, terrifying extent of your strength. It cost me my family, but it bought me my freedom, my sanity, and my self-respect. If you were on my side in this brutal but necessary revenge, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel right now for more true stories about family drama and surprising acts of revenge. And finally, share your thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Did I go too far, or did they finally get what they deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.